are the girls of the chorus of a new show called The Grand Tour. It is an adaptation of the 1944 Broadway play, Jakubowski and the Colonel, the one about a Jewish refugee, an anti-Semitic Polish officer, and a beautiful young woman, all escaping together from the Nazis in France during World War II. In 1958, the story was made into a delightful movie, Me and the Colonel, starring Danny Kaye. The star of the new musical, Joel Grey, with Florence Lacey.
You meet an exquisite young girl whose fancy you take in the moonlight. You have too much wine and you make a horrendous mistake in the moonlight. Two possibilities. She could become pregnant. Then again, she could not become pregnant. It's bad if she's pregnant, that's true. But life is still offering you the convenience of two possibilities.
The music and lyrics are by Jerry Herman, who provided the same for Hello, Dolly and Mame, and Michael Stewart, whose credits include Dolly, Bye Bye Birdie, and I Love My Wife, is co-author of the book with Mark Bramble.
But even a girl with a curse has the blessings of two possibilities. She could play the piano beautifully, she could draw, she could cook.
The Grand Tour, starring Joel Grey. It's scheduled to open on Broadway at the Palace around January 1st. This is Stewart Klein.
Star of a new musical that opened tonight on Broadway. It's called The Grand Tour. Stewart Klein was on the aisle at the Palace Theater.
At the Palace, that citadel of vaudeville, I started to hope tonight that Joel Grey would simply forget the Grand Tour and do a single. For that little giant of a performer is trapped here in a vehicle without wheels. The setting is France during World War II, and Grey plays S.L. Jakubowski, a Jewish refugee from Poland. He is trying to escape from the Nazis, and so is a haughty anti-Semitic Polish army colonel. And Grey tries to convince the officer that they should join forces.
Come on, do it for Poland. We're keeping the fatherland out and the motherland free. Though your attitude is so, they'll consider you heroic if you do it for B-O-L-A-N-D.
So these two unlikely comrades team up, posing as nuns and circus performers during their flight, and even falling in love with the same girl. If all of this sounds familiar, it should. It's based on the 1944 hit play, Jakubowski and the Colonel, which later became a movie, Me and the Colonel, starring Danny Kaye. But this time around, the vehicle has flat tires. The characters have been broadened into caricatures, and their growing awareness of each other's humanity is pulverized in formula Broadway plastic. The book relies on cliches, and the score is relentlessly bland. The music is by Jerry Herman, whose credits include Hello, Dolly, and while he has provided a pleasing ballad or two, the numbers overall lack spark, and there is only one pure dance number in the entire show. There are brief moments when the tiny Grey overcomes all of this. A minuscule but bright pantomime of a French waiter, a stomach-bumping bit with a circus clown, a swaying, stomping, Hasidic-style wedding dance. But these are only brief moments that indicate what might have been if Grey were free to cut loose. For the most part, he is mired here, and the show lethargically creeps along for a long 2.5 hours. Ron Holgate, as the Colonel, has a big booming baritone, and Frances Lacey, as the love interest, is also in good voice, but the Grand Tour plods when it should roll. Joel Grey at the Palace needs a swifter vehicle, especially since he can do it single-handedly. This is Stewart Klein.
Grand opening of the Grand Tour at the Palace Theater. And among the first-nighters at the new musical was Dennis Cunningham, who's with us now and has a review. Dennis?
Yes, Vic, that was Rock Hudson, not me. And lots of stars, Diana Ross and lots of stars. In fact, Phyllis Diller, escorted by Andy Warhol, no less, on going to her seat, stepped on my foot. Had I known that was to be the highlight of my evening, I would have cherished the moment. The Grand Tour is yet another of the undistinguished shows the season has had more than its fair share of. It is a musical whose main plot is about the growth of a friendship between an egotistical, narrow-minded Polish colonel and a timid but kind and resourceful little Jewish man as both flee the Nazis. Well, it's supposed to be about that, but the character and the plot are so sketchy, you almost have to guess what it's about or know the plot ahead of time. There's no dramatic tension between the two people. But the main problem with the show is that first and foremost, it's a star showcase for Joel Grey, who is, I am now convinced, not a star. Charming as he is, he has very little stage presence, and if he were not center stage in a spotlight, I'm sure you'd have a hard time finding him. Stars don't disappear on stage. Joel Grey does. As for his acting, most of it is a boyish cuteness that is not only annoying, it is embarrassing. As per usual, the chorus does its level best. Now, Joel Grey could probably be a very successful character actor, and he has been, but whoever is convincing him he's a star, at least in this show, is doing him and the show a terrible disservice. Furthermore, the Grand Tour gets help, only limp help, from the musical's other elements. Incidentally, the Grand Tour features, among other dubious things, a Jewish wedding and a group of singing nuns, making it, at any rate, a sort of ecumenical flop.
Joel Siegel took a grand tour of Broadway tonight, a grand tour that starred a different Joel. Joel?
Ernie, at last, the Grand Tour is a first-class Broadway musical, far and away the best of class this season. I even walked away humming the tunes, da-da-da-da-da. Well, you'll have to take my word for it. Here's the story. It's an adaptation of Jakubowski and the Colonel, a play by Franz Werfel about survival. About Jakubowski, a little Jewish guy who every time he turns around, there are Nazis. He ends up in Paris in 1940. He turns around and Nazis. And Jakubowski is on his way, and so is the Colonel, a Polish colonel who must get to London to organize the resistance. Sure, they'd go together, but the Polish colonel hates Jews. But Jakubowski has just bought the last car in Paris. But Jakubowski can't drive. But the Polish colonel can, but he won't. They appeal to his patriotism.
And Chopin surely agree that the team went down because we come to suffer out. If you do it for me, I'll pay me.
Jakubowski, of course, is Joel Grey, who is magnificent. He mugs, he mimes, he sings, he struts, he stops the show. Now, the Grand Tour isn't a perfect musical. Werfel's original theme, the survival of the little person in a world that's power-crazed and just plain big-crazed, somehow gets lost in the shuffle and the mazurka. And for some reason, it's not until the tail end of the second act that someone says Jew. No, it's not a perfect musical, but the Grand Tour won't take you for a ride. This is one good show. How good? Well, next week, my best friend's folks are coming to town, and this is the show I'm going to take them to see. Roseanne?